The digital clock on her nightstand read 10:43 p.m. when Tasha Evans decided to lace up her shoes and go for a run. The night air was dense with a foggy midnight chill, the sky a canvas of stars interlaced with clouds. Streetlights flickered in the distance, casting elongated shadows that danced along the pavement. The air smelt of rain, a promise of the upcoming storm. Tasha, a 35-year-old cybersecurity analyst living in Seattle, was not the typical protagonist you'd find in a story like this. She wasn't a superhero or a trained warrior. She was just an ordinary woman who found comfort in solitude, in the silence of the night when the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. Running was her escape, her little slice of serenity from the chaos of her job and her ongoing divorce. Nothing compared to the rhythmic sound of her shoes hitting the pavement, the steady beat of her heart syncing with her strides. She'd taken to running at night when the city was asleep, and she was alone with her thoughts. Her chosen path that night was an isolated route along the waterfront, a hushed strip of trail that followed the ebbing and flowing rhythm of the Puget Sound. The cityscape's glow ebbed with the waves, and the twinkling lights of the sleepless city reflected on the calm waters. Her lungs filled with the cool, salty air, bringing a sense of tranquility that only the sea could provide. But tonight, the tranquility felt strained, as though it was strung too tight, about to snap. A shiver slithered down her spine, prickling her skin beneath her sweat-soaked clothes. The stillness of the night was not peaceful. It was pregnant with a foreboding sense of unease. A shadow darker than the rest caught her eye. She stopped, breath hitching in her throat. She strained her eyes, trying to penetrate the murkiness. "Hello?" she called out, her voice swallowed by the surrounding darkness. There was no response, but the heavy sensation of being watched made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The silence was suffocating, the only sound being the soft lapping of the water against the shore. Suddenly a guttural laughter echoed, bouncing off the skeletal trees and the abandoned park structures. Fear tasted metallic on her tongue, and she instinctively backed away. "Who's there?" she demanded, voice barely a whisper. The laughter died as quickly as it had come, replaced with a sinister silence that gripped the night. For a moment she considered turning back. But then, the rational part of her brain kicked in. This was Seattle, not some backwater town with creepy folklore. It was probably just some homeless person, or a drunk who had lost his way. Steeling herself, she picked up her pace, the rhythmic thudding of her shoes on the pavement providing a strange comfort. She was nearly halfway through the trail when she heard it, a soft rustling sound, like someone was trailing her. She snapped around, heart pounding in her chest. But there was nothing, just the dense curtain of fog and the shadows stretching out like ghostly fingers. "All right, Tasha, get it together," she muttered to herself, trying to push away the gnawing fear. But even as she reassured herself, she couldn't shake off the feeling that she was no longer alone on the trail. The eerie silence of the night was broken by the subtle rhythmic echo of another set of footsteps that were not her own. The world seemed to go quiet. Suddenly, her midnight run wasn't peaceful anymore. It was a haunting melody of unknown dread, playing out in a fog-laden symphony. Before she could contemplate any further, a hand clamped around her mouth, stifling her scream, and an arm snaked around her waist. Panic surged through her, drowning out any semblance of rational thought. "Don't struggle," a voice slithered into her ear, his breath warm against her chilled skin. The last thing she saw before everything turned black was the midnight sky, blanketed with stars that flickered like the rapidly dying embers of her freedom. Her senses swirled in the darkness, engulfed within the terrifying embrace of her own fear. The sudden realization that she had been kidnapped in the dead of the night froze her, a living statue rooted in terror. When she finally managed to peel her eyes open, she found herself in a sparsely lit room, the flickering bulb casting an eerie glow around the space. Panic surged within Tasha as she took in her surroundings. The room reeked of dampness and rot, heavy with the sickly sweet stench of mildew. She was bound to an old wooden chair, her wrists tightly secured with coarse ropes that gnawed at her skin. Her shoes and socks were missing, a stark contrast to her damp, chilled bare feet. The door creaked open, revealing her captor. He was tall, his silhouette a menacing shadow under the dim lighting. His features were hidden save for his eyes. They were a striking ice blue, staring at her with a chilling intensity. Please let me go. I won't tell anyone. I swear," she stammered, her voice a frightened whisper against the quiet room. The man tilted his head, seemingly studying her with an unsettling calm. "You don't even know who I am or why I've brought you here," he retorted, his voice as cold as his gaze. "Why would you think I'd believe that?" His words sent a chilling wave through Tasha. What could he want from her? Money? Revenge? She sifted through her memories, searching for a potential enemy, a misstep, but found nothing. As he drew closer, the faint light fell upon his face, illuminating his chilling presence. Tasha recoiled instinctively, her back pressing against the chair, but she was trapped. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, forcing steadiness into her voice. He began to circle her like a predator, scrutinizing his captive. "I just want to get to know you, Tasha. You have a fascinating life, you know. A brilliant career, a crumbling marriage, and the darkness that you seem to embrace," he replied, his tone unnervingly casual. Her heart pounded against her chest, confusion and terror twisting her thoughts into a jumbled mess. How did he know so much about her? What did he intend to do with this information? His fingers lightly traced the side of her face, eliciting a shudder of revulsion. His laughter echoed in the room, a disturbing sound that scratched at her nerves. "You're so easy to read, Tasha," he whispered, his icy breath raising goosebumps on her skin. "But you're also intriguing, and that's why you're here." As she sat there, her body trembling with fear and uncertainty, one question haunted her. What was to come? What was his sinister game, and how could she possibly escape from it? Her heartbeat was a relentless drum, reminding her that she had to find a way out, and soon. The roles had reversed. The predator was now the prey, and only one would emerge from this nightmarish ordeal. Days turned into nights, and nights into days, in the chilling solitude of Tasha's dimly lit prison. She lost count of the hours as they bled into one another, each passing moment steeped in dread. Her captor was an enigma, visiting at irregular intervals, his presence bringing an icy terror that settled in her bones. The only comfort was in his absence, the crushing silence that was both a torment and a relief. His words kept echoing in her mind, his claim to wanting to know her. He never hurt her physically, but the psychological torture was unending. He would probe, asking her personal questions about her life, her work, her failed marriage. The helplessness was suffocating, her secrets stripped bare, and used to feed his twisted curiosity. On what felt like the 5th or 6th day, a realization dawned on her. The man seemed to know so much about her, and yet he was always careful to reveal nothing about himself. Could she use this? Turn it into her advantage somehow? "Tell me something about yourself," she asked, her voice echoing in the stark room. He tilted his head, considering her request. "Why would you want to know about me?" he questioned, his voice filled with a morbid curiosity. Tasha licked her lips nervously. "Fair's fair, isn't it? You know so much about me. It's only right that I should know about you." He let out a short laugh, the sound grating against the room's silence. "Fair? Do you really think any of this is fair, Tasha?" His tone was mocking, but there was a hesitation in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. I just want to understand. To know why I'm here. Why me?" The plea was genuine, her heart pounding with anxiety and a spark of hope. His expression was unreadable, the shadowy room hiding any semblance of emotion. But after what felt like an eternity, he moved. He pulled up a chair opposite her, crossing his arms and leaning back, studying her. "All right, Tasha, let's have a chat." A glimmer of hope ignited within her. Is this the breakthrough she needed? A chance to comprehend his motivations, to spot a vulnerability in his defenses, or even potentially find an escape route? As their warped dialogue began, she concentrated on repressing her fear. It was crucial to stay alert, to maintain a clear mind, despite the horror gnawing at her psyche. "What do you want to know?" he questioned, an odd look in his eyes. "Who are you?" she initiated, her heart hammering in her ribcage. He considered her for a beat before replying, "Does a name really matter, Tasha?" "Not a name," she elaborated. "I want to know about you, your life. Why are you doing this?" He held her gaze, answering with his typical frosty tone. "My life isn't the topic of interest here. As for why, well, that's a question you'll have to decipher yourself." A wave of frustration rolled over her, but she swallowed it down, straining to maintain her composure. She couldn't risk provoking him, especially while she was attempting to extract any bit of information she could. "Why me then? Why not someone else?" she queried, a hint of desperation coloring her tone. He leaned forward, the unnerving grin returning to his face. "Because you're not someone else, Tasha. You're you, and you're here because you're intriguing. You're distinct." His remark sent a tremor down her spine. His fixation with her was as chilling as it was perplexing. As he exited the room, leaving her in the semi-darkness, she replayed their conversation in her mind, dissecting every utterance, every expression. Despite the fear and bewilderment, she recognized that she now had something she didn't possess before, a marginal comprehension of her captor and a faint hint of hope. He found her intriguing, unique. That was a card she could play. She needed to keep him involved, keep the conversation flowing. It was a gamble, but it was the only strategy she had. The journey forward was a daunting mystery, but she had to traverse it to keep propelling herself onward. Because even in the shadow of fear, hope is a formidable force. And at this moment, it was her only weapon. Days flowed into nights, with each moment becoming an indistinguishable blur. Her captor seemed to open up more, his cryptic responses hinting at slivers of his life's story. He was an outsider, a man disengaged from society, harboring a unique fascination for those on the periphery, the lonely, the shattered. Individuals like Tasha, his increasingly frequent dialogues, though eerie and unsettling, began to depict a man who was solitary, removed from society, and starving for a deeper understanding of others. This didn't lessen the terror of her situation, but it instilled a bizarre sense of empowerment within her. One evening, he entered the room with a tray of food. As he set it down next to her, she noticed his keys hanging from his belt. Her heart pounded fiercely. This was perhaps her sole opportunity. "Who were you before all this began?" she ventured to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. His icy gaze met hers, momentarily thrown by the intimate nature of the question. I was a man, nothing more," he confessed, his voice trailing off. "And why this path?" she probed, eyeing him keenly. He appeared lost in thought, distant. Her heart pounded as she slowly reached out her bound hands towards his belt. I was tired of being unnoticed," he murmured, almost to himself. Her fingers grazed the icy metal keys. Just a bit more, she thought. Swallowing hard, she mustered as much empathy as she could into her voice. "You're not invisible. Not to me. Not anymore." He appeared taken aback, and as he struggled to form a response, she seized the moment. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, she snatched the keys from his belt, the clinking sound ringing sharply in the room. Shock flickered in his eyes, and for an instant, both froze. The calm shattered as she landed a swift kick to his chest. He staggered backwards, surprise and fury twisting his features. As he lunged at her, she managed to free her hands using the stolen keys. The ensuing struggle was messy and panicked, but desperation fueled her strength. When she saw an opening, she shoved him, causing him to lose his balance and hit his head against the wall. He collapsed, unconscious. Tears of relief welled up as she fled from the room. Her only goal was to escape, to put as much distance between her and her captor. The surroundings were unfamiliar and deserted. Directions didn't matter. Escape did. The night air was cold, the starry sky sprawling overhead. Unlike the night she was taken, the darkness now was a shroud, a cloak of invisibility from her captor. Fleeing into the night, her body shivered from exhaustion and fear, but each pounding step screamed of her survival. She was no heroine, and she wasn't safe yet, but she was alive and free. As the rush of adrenaline began to dissipate, The stark reality of her ordeal started to set in. Yet amidst the fear and uncertainty, one fact was crystal clear. She had a harrowing tale to tell. And perhaps, her story could help deter others from encountering a similar nightmare.